Our guest today is Sally Curley, an investor relations powerhouse. She's the founder and CEO of Curley Global, her own consulting firm. She spent a decade at Cardinal Health. She was in-house at Genzyme. She's won all sorts of IR awards over the years. I'm Brock Romanek, today on Zippy Point. So Sally, the board's role for E&S, I know you've served on the Columbus Zoo board and you were chair of their sustainability committee. Very cool. I remember watching the Tonight Show when I was a little kid, thinking that would go on forever. And then when I was an adult, I would know I was an adult because I was allowed to stay up late enough to watch the Tonight Show. But the Columbus Zoo got so famous, I guess Jack Hanna was on that all the time. I'm dating myself a little bit. Of course, those young enough won't even know what I'm talking about. So whatever. Which board committee typically is responsible at public companies for E&S matters?
You know, we found it really falls into three different categories. And so I would say first, there's an ESG or a sustainability committee that certain companies have and certain boards have decided to create that focus on strictly that. The second thing that we found is that it reports into the NomGov committee. And so separate from risk or ERM, enterprise risk management, which might report into the audit committee and typically does, this aspect of it actually reports into the NomGov committee. And then the third piece would be a separate risk committee, which would cover off on traditional ERM. It would cover off on risk oversight, separate from ERM, and it would cover off on ESG. So that's what we're seeing. There have been some studies actually that have been done recently and published. I believe it's Donnelly Financial just published one that found actually a very similar cadence. So typically ESG Sustainability Committee separate, and then NomGov, and then the risk committee as kind of the three tiers.
And then how did those committees' activities get reported back to the full board?
Yeah, again, what we found, and in our reading discussions with boards, discussions with our fellow corporate governance professionals, fellow ESG professionals, our own experience with clients, is that typically what happens is there's a quarterly report out to the committee that's responsible for the direct oversight, and then at least an annual report out to the full board. And so just to keep the full board informed, and it's apart from, on a quarterly basis, at those full board meetings, it's apart from sort of the committee synopsis. This would be the head of ESG or the project manager that's leading this, that's championing this at the senior most level, presenting to the board on at least an annual basis. In some instances, it's semi-annual, with a full range of ESG activities, recommendations on disclosure, education on trends. We strongly suggest that board educate themselves on ESG types of trends in each one of the categories, particularly for their company and their industry, to keep abreast of what may be coming down the pike and what they could consider, so that they have ample opportunity in advance to consider it ahead of the next board meeting when they may be faced with making a decision. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. So for example, State Street, the CIO of State Street a couple of weeks ago, actually at the end of August, I believe it was, sent a letter to boards asking for more information from boards with respect to oversight of culture, and also what they're doing in terms of initiatives regarding race and ethnic diversity, not just on boards, but in the named executive officer and the senior teams as well. And so that's the type of example boards should be prepared, and committees should be monitoring these trends to be able to have those fulsome board discussions before they get a letter from an investor like State Street.
So I guess this is at the heart of corporate governance in general. This is always about the three-legged stool of corporate governance. But how do investors know that there's fiduciary oversight? I guess, how do investors know that the board's really paying attention to the E&S issues, overseeing management about those E&S issues? How does that work?
Yeah, I mean, it's key for organizations to understand where they want to fall on the spectrum of ESG disclosure. And so do they want to be in the middle of the pack? Do they want to be a thought leader? And then once you commit. And so that really dictates how you communicate your ESG disclosures. Assuming, and this is what we hear from most companies, that they may not have the resources, either financial or human, to be a thought leader if we primarily deal with small caps and mid caps on the ESG projects. So we're helping them think through what tools can you use, what communications vehicles can you use to be able to demonstrate your actions with respect to ESG and your commitment with respect to ESG. And I just want to mention here, I view ESG as through the lens of risk minimization. So if you think about all these different stakeholders, really it comes down to risk minimization. Investors, it's an obvious one. They want to minimize their risk from an investing standpoint, but employees want to minimize risk from a guilt by association standpoint. And they also want to make sure that the organization that they work for is going to be around, is truly going to be a viable, long-standing, sustainable organization. So to your question, proxy CDNA as appropriate is clearly becoming the tool. The CDNA section in particular is clearly becoming a tool to be able to use for ESG disclosures. A lot of companies are actually carving out a separate ESG section where they talk about their environmental actions, state any goals, their stakeholder engagement, including shareholder engagement, but also their engagement with the community, their engagement with any other stakeholders, customers, suppliers, regulators that may be critical. And then the last piece, obviously, is the governance. It gives them an opportunity to highlight what governance actions they've taken over the year and the good governance that they have that's in place. The website is clearly the go-to for every stakeholder. More and more, the ESG rating and ranking firms are focusing on public disclosure, and their go-to is the website. So if you're concerned as an organization about advancing your scoring, either through the proxy advisory firms, ISS and Glass Lewis, or through some of the the big ERFs, as they call them, the ESG raters and rankings like MSCI and Sustainalytics, the website's probably your go-to. And we're seeing more and more companies create separate sustainability pages or ESG pages or corporate responsibility pages that outline exactly what their activities are and what their disclosures are. So
it'll be interesting to see the pace at which ESG disclosures infiltrate the proxy statement more and more. I think it's going to be a very accelerated pace. We're really in the first inning of all this in terms of proxy disclosures, but I bet the sixth inning will be here faster than we know it, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think you're right. And there was an interesting discussion, actually both at the SEC level. In fact, Commissioner Roisman mentioned it in his keynote to the Society of Corporate Governance annual meeting. He mentioned this difference between material and materiality. And I think it's important. Companies really need to consider, if they are going to include it in a legal document, a legal filings such as the proxy and the CDNA or a 10K, or if they're 8K'ing their investor presentation, they need to carefully consider what disclosures they would like to include there versus this concept of materiality, where it may be of meaningful importance to the investor, but not rise to the level of SEC definition of material. So that's the differentiation, and to think about it through that lens of, if it's material included in an SEC filing, it may be of materiality interest to an investor or another stakeholder group, but not rise to that level of an SEC filing, at which point maybe it's okay to put it on your website, your investor presentation, or an ESG report.
Yeah, that was an important speech, and I'm glad it was delivered and got the publicity that it deserved. And it'll be interesting to see what the SEC does in terms of rulemaking and interpretive guidance going forward here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thanks very much, Sally.
Thank you, Brock.